that's for sure. Never have to close the door. Been a long time, a year before, and I'm missing you so bad.
Hi guys, welcome back to Exmo Lex. Before we get started today, I just want to mention, because I forgot to in my last video, but I have a P.O. box now. I've already gotten a few letters and honestly, they absolutely warm my heart. I have them on my fridge, so if you've ever wanted to send snail mail, check the description for my P.O. box address. Beyond that, please remember to subscribe to the channel. That would be awesome. Today, I want to talk about people being denied access to Mormon temples. This happens all the time for a variety of different reasons, and I asked you guys if I could share some of your stories, so I'm going to talk about a couple of mine and then I'm going to share yours. For people who don't know, in order to enter an LDS temple, you have to have what is called a temple recommend. This is just a little card that you get stating that you're worthy to be in the temple. Mormons will have an interview with their bishop where their bishop will ask them questions from the church to decide if they're worthy to enter the temple or not. These questions include things like, do you keep the law of chastity? Do you pay 10% of your income to the church? Are you a full tithe payer? Do you sustain the prophet and apostles? Do you follow the word of wisdom? Things like that. The reason I decided to make this video is because often when I'm making videos, especially on TikTok, I will mention things like you have to pay tithing to go to the temple, and Mormons will be like, no you don't, that's not true, when in reality it definitely is. So I just wanted to share some of my own stories and stories from other people that are showcasing this point. Oftentimes, people are denied access to the temple for really dumb reasons. So I'll start off with a couple stories of my own. One, a family member of mine one time drove, I think it was probably like 3 or 4 hours to a wedding. If you get married in a temple, you have to have a temple recommend, obviously, to get in. And this goes for all the friends and family as well. So some family members of mine were getting married. My family members drove all the way down to see them get married and got all the way into the temple at the front desk before realizing they didn't have their temple recommend. This was a wedding for like a niece or a nephew kind of a thing. So it wasn't like the end of the world, but it was still really sad. This is a couple, so the husband and wife. The husband had his temple recommend, but the wife did not. The wife was super sad about it, but she told the husband, just go in. I'll wait outside. She could have waited in the temple waiting area, but she was really sad. As you can imagine in that moment, it's super emotional because you're watching all of your family members go into the temple without you and witness the wedding, and you can't go. So, you know, instead of crying in the temple waiting area, she went back to her car and cried it out in the car. One of the saddest things about this story to me is the fact that later this person told me that the way she felt during that time gave her time to ponder what it would be like if your family made it to the celestial kingdom and you did not. That is so sad and so messed up, but Mormons do believe that families will be separated in the afterlife. Some people are going to be great and they're going to make it to Mormon VIP heaven, and others are not. The second story is also one that happened to a family member. It's really strange how this story is so different to me on the other side. I viewed it so much differently when I was a member of the church. A family member of mine was getting married, and that person's mother wanted to attend the wedding. Unfortunately, although she was technically a member of the church, she hadn't attended for many years, so she obviously didn't have a temple recommend. But she really wanted to be there to see her son get married. What she ended up doing was, a day or two before the wedding, she called the temple to see if there's anything she could do. Initially, the temple workers asked her, well, who's your bishop? And she said, I don't know. And they said, what do you mean you don't know? She said, well, I haven't been to church in a few years and I'm not sure who my bishop is. The temple workers over the phone laughed at her and said, well, you're going to need to take that up with President Monson. She said, okay, well, who is that? Because like I said, she hadn't been to church in years and she didn't know who that was. They laughed at her again and said, the prophet? The night before or the night after the wedding, this story was told in a big family setting without this person there. And everybody else, everybody that was a worthy member of the church and had a recommend and was able to go to the wedding, laughed and laughed that this had happened to her. And I understand what they were laughing at. Like, oh, it's so silly. How can you want to get in the temple but not know who the prophet is? Haha. But let's think about that for a minute. How sad is it that we're mocking a mother who really wants to go see her son be married, but can't because she doesn't have a temple recommend. I really hate being on the other side of that and seeing like how messed up that truly was, that everybody was making fun of her for that. Now I want to move into telling your guys' stories. I got a lot of them. Thank you guys so much for sending them in. I definitely am not going to be able to read them all, but I really appreciate it. At tithing settlement one year, the week before the young women were supposed to go to the temple, I had to admit to my bishop that I wasn't a full tithe payer. I hadn't paid tithing on Christmas money from my grandpa. I was 13. My parents were so horrified that my mom gave me the amount of money I was supposed to pay the night before the temple, and I took it to the bishop's house. Then I paid her back later. Also, I could go to a white jumpsuit contest and get baptized for unconsenting dead people. The fact that they have literally children have to pay tithing to get in the temple is just mind-boggling to me. The church preaches love and acceptance and forgiveness and kindness, and they're really, really into pointing out we're the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Our gospel is all about Christ. Do you really think that Christ would deny access to this sacred place to children because they hadn't paid the church? After scrolling on Tumblr and coming across, I felt so guilty and told my bishop about it. I had just renewed my recommend and was hoping to be a temple worker in the Rexburg temple. Because I had accidentally seen it, my recommend was removed and I wasn't allowed to go back to the temple for 3 months. I am so sorry, but like, if you were suddenly unworthy every time you came across on accident, nobody would ever be worthy. That happens all the time. I hadn't been paying my tithing for a few months, but I wanted to go to my brother's wedding, so I started paying my tithing again every month. I went to the bishop to get my recommend renewed, and he said because I missed a few months of tithing, I couldn't get my recommend renewed. He said it had to be full tithing starting from January. I thought that was ridiculous. Another item added to my shelf. That is ridiculous, and it goes to show the inconsistency of bishops in the church, because there was a time where my husband and I were really, really struggling, just barely making it by, and we didn't pay our tithing for probably a few months. And then when we went to the bishop to talk about it, he was like, just start paying now. And he gave us recommends. It was no big deal to him at all. But this bishop, like, no, you missed a few months, so no temple recommend for you. Part of youth conference was we were going to go do baptisms for the dead before we left to go camping, and a group of us stayed at the church while everyone else went to the temple. Most of the other kids stayed because they weren't baptized members, so they couldn't go in the temple, but I was humiliated because I had to stay because I'd gone a little too far with my boyfriend. Everyone knew I wasn't worthy of a temple recommend because I was the only one that was baptized that wasn't going. It was terrible. This is another thing that bothers me so much about the church. There's a whole lot of talk of like, oh, nobody's gonna know if you're making mistakes. Like, it's totally anonymous. You can go talk to the bishop and nobody will ever know. That's not true, because in situations like this where everybody is going to the temple together, if you don't go, people are automatically going to know, ooh, you're not worthy to have a temple recommend. And also in situations where people aren't worthy to take the sacrament because their bishop told them they couldn't for whatever reason, people are going to see that. The person that's passing the sacrament, the people that are sitting next to and around you, the people on the stand are going to see that. Like, that isn't a super like inconspicuous thing. A couple was unworthy of the temple and instead had a wedding on the lawn of the LDS church. They stood in front of the stake president after walking down the aisle for 45 minutes while he gave a full-on general conference-worthy lecture about being temple-worthy. It was summer and the bride was red in the face and sweating from standing in the heat and her gown for that time. Not to mention, she was crying. I was so uncomfortable for them. Yikes. I would be so uncomfortable for them too. The fact that the bishop decided that that was an appropriate time to sit and talk about temple worthiness just blows my mind. The garments made my mom feel terrible, and she stopped wearing them for a little while, although she continued attending church and paying a full tithe. Because of the garments issue, though, she couldn't attend my brother's temple wedding, and his wife's entire family shamed her outside of the temple and at the reception. They even got in front of her and pushed her to the back when my brother and his wife emerged from the temple, so that my mom could barely even see the bride and groom come through the doors. We had been waiting by the doors so she could have that moment at least. It was the one thing she really wanted since she couldn't attend the wedding itself, and they treated her like she may as well have been a stranger. She didn't go in the temple after all. What kind of a mother is that? They shamed me and one of my sisters too, but this wasn't our first rodeo. I'm more angry about how the experience was for my mom. This reminds me of the story I told earlier. The fact that parents, as a mom, it would just be so devastating to me to not be allowed to see my children get married. My mom wasn't allowed one time because she drank herbal tea, and the bishop at the time had a very staunch, no hot drinks including tea of any kind position. Same bishop denied me because I didn't pay tithing on my $20 allowance. Another instance where bishops are just completely and totally inconsistent. The bishops I had growing up, I mean, obviously, like coffee and tea, bad, but herbal tea was totally fine. Now that I'm Exmo, one of my biggest regrets is that my father-in-law was excluded from seeing his daughter married. I can't imagine the pain I inflicted in that regard. The thought of not being able to see my daughter get married is terrible, and I did it to someone else. I'm really, really sorry, but please don't blame yourself for that, because it's not your fault. You were indoctrinated to believe a certain way, and it really, really sucks in hindsight, but you can't put that blame on yourself. Someone I personally know wasn't allowed to go to their son's temple wedding because they had to make the choice between paying their mortgage and paying a full tithe after his cancer treatments cost him his job. This is why it infuriates me so much when I make a TikTok that says you have to pay tithing to go to the temple, and there's people that are like, no, you don't. Yeah, you do. You do. Even in really tight situations, the church has taught and currently teaches that no one is too poor to pay tithing. It's messed up. I had just given my farewell talk. The next day, someone told my stake president I was sending explicit photos to other men. I was absolutely temple worthy at the time. My bishop didn't believe me and took my recommend. So much for the spirit of discernment, am I right? Mormons think that bishops are something special because they're taught they are. They're taught that bishops have the spirit of discernment, but these are just guys, just regular average men. There's nothing special about them. They haven't been called by God. They don't have any special powers that allow them to see the truth. They just don't. To wrap this up, let's just talk about a few things. First of all, let's acknowledge that you do have to pay tithing in order to enter the temple. And if you're not paying tithing and still getting in the temple, you're either lying or you got really, really lucky with the bishop roulette. And what do you guys think? Is it totally fair or totally wrong to deny family members seeing their family get married because they're not worthy or they're not the same religion? Because in my opinion, it's messed up. And it's also messed up to teach people that there's going to be separation in the afterlife. Like I mentioned in the first story, Mormons believe that in the afterlife, you are separated into different levels of heaven, just like how you're separated into getting into the temple or not. Some people are worthy enough to go to VIP heaven, or maybe the one below that, or the one below that. Either way, you're not going to be together because you're not worthy. Let me know what your thoughts are on this. Make sure to leave a comment. And before we go, I have to say a huge thank you to my patrons. You guys are amazing. I appreciate your support so, so, so much. Special thank you to Anthony Guthrie at Keegar, Craig Call, Jake Nunyabiz, Melissa Jane, and the Exmo Candle Company for supporting at the Demon tier on my Patreon. Love you guys. Remember to like, comment, subscribe, share, find me on all my other social media for more content, and I will see you guys next time. Bye!
Never tell, just trust that I'll keep it locked in a cell. Never revealing no secrets you're keeping, these promises strong as a spell. I'll never tell. Yeah, I like you, that's for sure. Never have to close the door.